this is a talk about all of my previous experiences with open source, the lessons I learned along the way, and how it all built up to my latest project, though, and why all of that previous experience was necessary. I'm also going to go into how I think things could possibly improve right now, because the open source ecosystem has changed and computing has changed. So, first in the timeline is WebOS mods. So my mom is legally blind, and she had a really, really difficult time seeing her phone. Now, nowadays, most phones have a text slider where you can just increase the font a ton. But back then, they didn't really have that. And so what I did is I actually edited the core files of the phone. See, this was running something called WebOS. And WebOS had almost every single app using web technologies, though. And honestly, it worked really, really well. It got shut down due to other reasons, but for the time, it worked well. So all I had to do was just look into the file system of the phone, take out the individual file for, the overall theme, and then just change everything to bump up the text file, the text size. And this was only possible because HP had decided that developer mode should be incredibly easy to access, and nothing should really be off limits for you to modify your own phone. And so I was able to create what's called a patch file that just simply said, remove this line of code and add this one in with the bigger text. And if you look to the side, you'll see preware, which allows you to apply patches. And so I took that took that patch, put it into preware, put it on her phone, and now the text was way bigger. Did it mess up a few UI elements here and there? Yes, but ultimately though, if she can't see the phone, then the bigger UI elements don't help. So it was an essential thing in order to, make her phone work. So it increased accessibility hugely compared to anything else. Because ultimately though, the original designers don't know every single kind of accessibility that someone might need. They don't know, how well you can deal with, say, text size. They don't know if you need more contrast. They can guess and they can add these things in preliminarily, but there will always be people like, for example, me, who I have a hard time navigating certain interfaces because my brain works much more spatially than linguistically, and they just can't account for everybody. So open source allows you to actually make things work for you, and that's what I learned all the way back in 2010. Well, I was 9, I think it was. So yeah, I was 9 years old when all of this happened. And so this was one of my first experiences. Was that on the old Palm Pre? This was the Pre 3 and the Pre 2. If you're going to talk, put it through the microphone. Wait for the microphone. Yeah.
Thank you for confirming that. That was the software on the old Palm phones before they went to Android, and
right. Yeah.
I recall HP bought that and open sourced it, and it's still accessible for people to work on, isn't it?
It is, however, because it's not supported, you generally don't have as many ecosystems of applications.
Oh, okay, it's
so,
kind of abandoned.
And that's one of the big trade-offs with open source. And LG has it.
Thank you.
So here is my first Scale talk. Now, I'd been to Scale the year before, Scale 10X, but I was just, I was 10 years old and I had never been to Scale, so I just decided, why not look around? But then I decided, hey, I like all of these talks though, and I want to share my experience as an 11-year-old about how you can be involved in open source. So it was pretty naive at the time, a lot of the stuff. And it was very code-oriented because I was doing mostly programming at the time. I do more design stuff and programming now. But, it was stuff like, for example, pick your programming language like that's something you have to do, but, it's obviously not. But, it did teach me public speaking at that. So, and so I learned a ton from this. I mean, I learned public speaking, though. I learned how people reacted. I had funny little gags where I literally just threw candy at people when they participated in the talk. It was great. It was hilarious and all. And so, The whole presentation, though, I had to stand on a soapbox because I was so tiny at the time. Um, and I'm surprised that the whole room was packed considering. And at the time, Scale didn't have the next generation track, right? This was something that I was just like, I'm going to go in the general track to speak about this. I mean, the next year, because of me and Keela Banks, they made the next generation track because they were like, oh, wow, kids actually want to speak here? So that's really nice and all. So then we have the Energia MSP 430 code. I forgot. I'll be perfectly honest, I don't know what I did here. And the reason why is because all of their stuff is probably on some other entire Git hosting service. And it was so long ago that I completely forgot. I know I fixed something very important, but I forget. For context, the Energia is like the Arduino IDE, but for MSP 430 launch pads. And that was basically incredibly low power. We're talking actual microwatts. So that's really good for if you're chucking something all the way into space and every bit of power counts. Or you just want to run something that lasts for actual months to years. And so I fixed something on it, but I can't remember what. And so archiving in open source is incredibly important. And I have code, but it's all on GitHub. But what happens when GitHub inevitably dies? Because nothing lasts forever. So I really should have archived it. And that's my bad, and that's what I learned from this whole experience, Then we go to Scale 12x when I was 12, the Blender workshop. So basically, what's it called? This was my first workshop class. And it was 1 hour long. I was teaching people how to model and render a model of a die. And 1 hour teaching a whole room of people as a 12-year-old. We did not get anywhere close to done. Everyone, like half the class was behind and all, though. But I did learn a lot about taking feedback, though. I learned more about Blender for just doing this whole talk because, I learned SketchUp, which was proprietary and all, and for different things. But, just knowing how to teach, that's what this whole class did. I found that you often have to get into the action in order to actually be able to learn things. Like, for example, getting the demos to work in this particular talk, which we'll see if they work out by the end. Next, we have the Witch-E emulator, which is something you can actually try at home. So yeah, the Witch-E is basically an emulator or an educational project to replicate the oldest digital decimal computer that still works. It's a mouthful, but basically in the 1950s, the Harwell Institute created this thing called the Wolverhampton Instrument for Teaching Computer History. Wait, no, that's the project name. It's the Harwell Decatron is what it was called. And it actually used 0 to 9, so it used base 10 numbers instead of the binary we're used to today. RAM was actually decatrons, vacuum tubes that basically were spinners. And so you could actually see, as the memory was cycling, you could see the decatron spin in the computer. So it's a lot more tangible than most computers are nowadays, though, because now it's all just shoved in memory, which is this black box that you can't really see. So I'm going to play the video here. Please work. Otherwise, I'll be getting the source code and running this myself. I'm getting the source code, aren't I? Oh. Oh, it didn't. It's fine. I'll get the source code. Right, so I'm going to actually grab the source code for a paper tape that was used in the actual Witch. So you could actually run this. You could punch it into a 5-hole paper tape, feed it into the Witch, and it would work. Let's go squares. Right. Right, so I just paste in and I want this one to be looped. Oh no, wait, that's a straight tape. Right? And then we have tape 2, which is looped. So back then, we didn't have for loops and such. So we basically had to, we had to actually take the tape and then actually physically tape it together at the ends in order to make a loop. And then whenever you reached a certain instruction, it would actually switch to the 3rd or 4th tape or so on in order to, do the control flow of the program. So learning about this, though, was really interesting. I made this whole emulator in JavaScript, which actually isn't the worst thing for a really old computer like this. So I can hit start, and the stores will fill with all of the values. These were designed to be actual, Decatron loading spinner things, but we never really got around to it, and also it was just too tiny. So as you can see, though, we're just loading all of those memories, all of those values into memory, and then the accumulator is going, and the accumulator is a way bigger area of memory, right? So I learned so much about the core of how computers work, computer history, though, all of the weird and wacky things. I learned emulation and working with other people, because I was working with David Anders, aka Purple Plague, for this entire project, though, because I didn't know the witch. I just knew JavaScript, and I'm using Enyo, which was a thing from WebOS, and so I needed a lot of help. And while this project never really won any awards or anything, I'm still incredibly glad that it's still out there for everyone to try on this website, witch-e.nosuch.network. And you can also find the witch-e repository. Right? This is a project that was archived successfully. So, and as you can see here, we have 0.01 and 0.0001. So it just got the square of that number, square of that number, square of that number, and it'll just keep doing this over and over again for pretty much infinity. Now, you might be asking, this seems like a really simple computer. Why would someone make it? And that's specifically because it does things perfectly reliably. That's why computers were made, after all, though. You used to have people who were called computers. So, learning about computer history made so much more possible. You wouldn't believe. Let's go back to the slideshow. I went on a bit of a tangent, but it's important. Then we have the scale 13x talk. For the record, in the middle of there, I was just working on random projects, but nothing really notable. I was learning 3D modeling and so on. But I did a talk on the Witch-E, right? So this is my first talk about a project that I actually built, right? So some things I learned in this include, I learned basically representing your own project is surprisingly difficult, though. A lot of open source people feel like their projects aren't that good, and I was actually feeling that at this time too, because, well, I was so used to my own project, though, that it seemed all natural to me. But, I also learned, better, clearer public speaking. Because this is an incredibly complex topic, I had to boil everything down into simpler terms for everybody. I had to make things interesting. I had to, I had to basically refine all of the skills I had learned in order to do this. Because the first talk, I was just doing an initial, I was just explaining things, though, and it's a simpler topic. The second one, though, I was doing a workshop, and I had to learn to work with others. And then the third one is where I had to basically learn how to not just speak about a topic, but speak sort of for myself as well. So, yeah. Okay, jumping over to 14x, though. So for scale 14x, this was a lightning talk. So it was at Upscale, which was on Saturday this year, I think. Right? Or Saturday or Friday? It was Friday, yeah. Basically the idea is, if you weren't there, you had 5 minutes for all of your slides. You have, I think, 20 slides, 5 minutes, so you get like 5 seconds a slide, and you just have to go. It automatically jumps. And I was doing a talk about choosing the correct framework for your project. Now, I don't know if this came across well, but this is my slide. As you can tell, it's heavily broken because I didn't choose the right framework for my own project. This was a case of where everything fails and I just have to roll with it. So since every slide broke, I basically had to say, oh yeah, this is what was supposed to happen, right? Like I did, for example, with the Witch-E right now, right? The video didn't play, so I had to go and do the demo in person. And so I had to adapt on the fly, though, because realistically, what else am I going to do? And so, this is the first instance of what I call demo syndrome, right? Where you do everything right. You put so much time and effort into making it work perfectly, and then on the exact day that you're presenting it, it all dies. Every single bit of it. So that's, yeah. Yeah, this broke before I even started. It had to go 5 minutes late because the slides wouldn't even load. And this is because I was using Google presentations, Google Sheets, Google Slides, and then I exported that to PowerPoint, and then I imported it to LibreOffice, and then I modified it in LibreOffice, and then it was imported into a different version of LibreOffice. And really, I should have just figured out exactly which version of LibreOffice they were using and just built the slides there. Yeah, choosing the right tool, it was very important because this whole talk was hypocritical at the end. But I did learn from this experience, though, right? So that's important. And this will come into play later with Stardust, though, because one of the main things I said is if something doesn't work, literally, you sometimes just have to take it, throw it out, and restart, though. You have to be very careful when you do, but you have to do that. 50 next talk. Editing multimedia using open source tools. This taught me a lot about user experience, specifically, because I had compared proprietary tools like Adobe Premiere for video editing to open source ones like Kdenlive. And so with that, though, I had to evaluate things not just as someone who likes software and likes programming, but also through a design perspective. Because it doesn't matter how technically good something is if its interface is absolute garbage, And so I had to critically examine every piece of the interface. Of course, in the talk I was heavily biased, though, because again, this is an open source conference, and I really like open source and so on. But at the same time, though, I had to sometimes give a point to the proprietary stuff because it was just better. Pretty much for the open source stuff, I said it's simple. But of course, simple doesn't necessarily mean it's good to use. So, by the way, the image here, that's of cutting out the background of all of those candy hearts. So turning it into a transparent image. I wish I had a video for this one. But 17x, IO Tail. So my dad was doing a whole part of a track where he talked about microcontrollers and, how do you put MicroPython on it? So where you can use them for, what's it called? So where you can use them for embedded applications. For example, you can put a microcontroller and you can hook it up to Wi-Fi and you can have it constantly running as a reliable source for, say, monitoring plants, Internet of Things, right? Because this is Internet of Things, ALE. But he didn't know Arduino. He didn't know C++. He didn't, so I had to take over for the talk for him. And so, what's it called? This whole entire thing was just like, it was basically me with no preparation in a room trying to teach a bunch of people about this topic. And so I'll be honest, there wasn't many lessons I learned from this other than just like I had to practice everything I learned. I had to be very, very fast. So all of that, I rushed through all of that because I want to talk about how all of those experiences helped me with my latest project, Stardust XR. Now Stardust XR is a 3-dimensional user interface for augmented and virtual reality. So you've heard of the Quest devices, you've heard of Apple Vision Pro, right? And in order to make those, you have to have a fundamentally different interface than 2D. And so Stardust is a fundamentally different interface that is made for when you wear a headset on your head. You use hand tracking, you use controllers that are in 3D space, and you can also use eye tracking and so on. So it required very different design. I'll even show you some. I'll show you some images of it too, just while we wait. So you can, for example, place panels in 3D space, like this, right? You can interact with them for 2D compatibility, but you can also do a lot more, and I'll get into that. But in the actual construction of this project, though, because this is not something I could do myself, right? This is the equivalent of Wayland or Xorg or so on. It's the equivalent of GNOME, KDE, etc. It's a massive project that there's no way I could do by myself, but I need to start it by myself because at the time, nobody really cared that much about augmented and virtual reality. So, in terms of open source, though, I had to learn contribution, right? I had to learn because a lot of the tools that I wanted to use simply just weren't available, though. There were things that were similar, but I had to basically turn them into what I needed in order to make this project. So I started with StereoKit. Now, the whole point of StereoKit and why I needed it was because, see that code up top? That code is all you need to make a literal model in 3D space like that. I needed that simplicity because I just didn't have time to write an entire renderer, to write an entire graphics pipeline from scratch. I mean, it's ridiculous, though, just how much time it would have taken. But StereoKit didn't run on Linux. And so I basically had to talk with the project maintainer, though. I had to ask, okay, hey, I want to add this to Linux, though. And then I had to do most of the work, but I got a lot of help along the way to actually implement it, though. So I had to learn, though, I had to use all of the skills of interacting with people that I learned at the previous talks. I had to use all of the programming skills that I had used there. I had to use the design skills that I had picked up along the way in order to make all of this work to where StereoKit is actually very, very, very reliable on Linux today. And in fact, it's not just used for other projects, though. It's not just used for Stardust XR, it's used for other projects, right? So for some context, though, this is something you would see in a VR headset. So you could launch an application made with StereoKit in a VR headset, and you would see this, for example, right? This is an example of some of the more unique UI in StereoKit, though. That is the kind of thing I need that isn't really possible in other tools, or at least not easy in other tools. And then this is an example of another thing I made that StereoKit adopted, which is this little grip surface. So when you move your hand close to something, it now has little dots to indicate that, it's all grippy and you can drag it around, right? So, okay, yeah, so this is Monado. This is another core piece to doing it. Stardust may create the 3D objects for you to interact with your favorite apps through, but it doesn't really allow you to work with the headset, though. It needs a separate component for the actual headset and allowing you to use it. I made several contributions to Monado. Let's start off with this one. So this headset is called the Project North Star. Now, the Project North Star is an open hardware AR headset. That means you can see all the way through it, right? You put it on your head, though, and these little reflectors basically bounce light from a screen to the side, though. So it looks like the actual objects are floating in space, but they're sort of ghost-like. They're hologram-like. So why am I telling you this? Well, because, see that right there? This is all running entirely on Linux, though. I created the initial driver for the North Star, though, and I also did the majority of the port to, of StereoKit to Linux. And that means, though, that this developer, my friend Moshi, was actually able to use it to develop open source hand tracking. And all of this effectively means, though, that it started the ability for you to take an old headset, say the Windows Mixed Reality line of headsets, which is now officially deprecated by Microsoft, and bring it back from the dead, though, right? Because now you can use the inbuilt cameras, and it can automatically know where your hands are. So now your hands can be a controller for 3D objects. So you can open up a heart in 3D, for example, though, using your hands, right? Another thing, though, that this taught that was related was I created this thing. You see, Monado is a bit of a pain to launch and a bit of a pain to use because it's very low-level software. So I created something, a little prototype I called Rex. It's a Xenoblade reference. The idea was I had taken a look at what Minecraft launchers had done, right? Because Minecraft is also an incredibly complex game that has a lot of different configurations you can put it in. You have tons of mod packs, you have tons of versions, all of that. So I made this, which is just a way to simply say, I want to launch Monado that works well for this headset with these settings, with one click of a button. It never really went anywhere. However, it inspired someone to create Envision, which is sort of the next generation version of this, which is much, much easier to use. It's much more up to date, and it's actively maintained an entire community for Linux augmented and virtual reality enthusiasts. Right? Let's see. So now we go to the Scale 20X talk last year. So this is my talk about Stardust, though, and the overall Linux VR ecosystem as a whole. Now, what this taught me is a huge, massive case of demo syndrome, though. No matter how hard you prepare ahead of time, though, and actually, I'm not going to. What's it called? So I had brought a wired headset with me, which you can see on me right there. And I plugged it in, and, well, I only got a few demos in before it totally failed. In fact, it failed so badly that the video player itself, it actually glitched out so heavily. I'm very sorry, VLC, for ever doubting you, because VLC was the only thing that worked that day. Demo? Fair enough. We got a seg fault in the Intel Mesa driver, effectively meaning no demos today. But I have this video as a backup, and I also have even more. So basically, though, this is a showcase of Stardust and what's really, really cool about it. So all of those talks, though, all of interacting with people, seeing what they needed, though, learning programming and design and everything, though, right? It all led to this. Basically, an interface to where, for context, this isn't actually possible in anything else, right? You can't just take a pen, a virtual pen, and you can't draw around all of your favorite windows in 3D space in literally any other standalone headset. The Quest can't do this, the Vision Pro can't do this. Of course, that's because they decide not to do this, but that's the beauty of open source. Just like I said in the WebOS slide, because I have control over the system, I can make it do something that's way better for me than was ever possible before, right? And because I had been able to talk with people and show them demonstrations of what I'd done before, I was able to make this demo video to just quickly and concisely help people understand what was going on here, right? What time is it? 5:14. Okay. We got plenty of time. Sorry, I rushed through this. Another thing you'll notice, though, is that I literally just took a terminal application and I tossed it into the TV. So that's something that is really, really important for accessibility reasons. Because I learned, though, that no one size fits all. Not even close, in fact. What's it called? So I decided, why not take it and make it to where you can just switch interfaces on the fly, though? Because there's so many different real-world situations where AR and VR will happen, right? You could be sitting on a train, though, and trying to interact with your TikTok feed. You could go on, you could be having a giant desk in front of you and you want to interact with all of your windows floating in front of you. All of that, though, you need different interfaces. And so being able to just take your favorite app and put it inside of a TV for retro gaming or such, I mean, that's incredibly powerful. Yeah. And so then I also have the workspaces, right, where you can literally just grab the side of a workspace and you can bring it up and down, just like GNOME workspaces, but in 3D. You know, all of this was only possible because I had all of that previous experience. Because I learned, you know, I learned demos, I learned programming, I learned what people needed, I learned design, all of it. So, and now we come to the current talk, which is, why is this? No, it's not. It's not going full screen. Oh well. So now we come to the current talk, where, while I wasn't very prepared compared to the other talks, though, because I've been so busy doing a lot this year, you know, I've been improving on Stardust for the past year, to the point where, hang on, if I go to the Stardust server, right? I've created an entire community full of people, though, that are helping with this project, right? Being at scale those previous years taught me a ton about how to build and maintain a community. I'd been to the expo hall where people could just literally share anything they wanted to, right? I'd been to talks where people could go into more specifics about exactly what they wanted. And what I've learned is that being inclusive, and actually just having a place that people can share what they're doing is incredibly important in order to be able to make open source thrive. So here basically I'm showing off one of the special features, which is the ability to save and restore state. That basically means, though, that if you leave a virtual object here, you go a couple cities over and you go back, it'll still be there. And yeah, this is basically a project showcase at this point. Go ahead. Give the mic. Oh, thanks. Yeah. So actually, let's talk more about that community, though, right? Because community is an important part of open source. So if we look here, this video, though, a lot of clients here were made by different people, right? We have the entirety of this inspired by this initial post right here, where this is navigating around an environment with hand tracking, though, right? So this was the original inspiration for this video that I'm about to show you, right? The key, though, is that that was only doable in isolation. You were only able to run that one app at that time, though. But with Stardust, you're able to run that and other apps at the exact same time, though. So I had to take inspiration from that person who actually published the source code, and I copied a lot of that source code in order to make this possible. See that hexagon launcher? That was made by members of my community, Viola, and several other people, though, in order to actually make this work. You know, and what's it called? And C Flatland, though, that was inspired by a lot of the work that other people like Simula VR had been doing with their flat window managers. Here, I'll show you, simulavr.com. It'll take a bit. Yeah, it'll take a bit. I don't think the internet likes me today. That's not going to help. Not in this case. Oh well, here, I'll just show you the image results. Okay, here we go. This is it. Yeah. So that, for example, though, and also motor car, which I can't. Yeah, there we go. Right, and that and motor car were a heavy inspiration for Stardust, though. They had come up with some ideas that are used today, literally like actual decades before they were in use. Like, where is it? I can't. Hmm. I guess I'm not finding the image today. But basically, though, yeah, that was a heavy inspiration. Um, where was I? Where was I again? Oh, yeah. Theming. Right. So, theming in virtual reality is incredibly important. It's not just a really nice, pretty thing. It actually sets your mood and all. Um, and so, while proprietary platforms, though, think that, they want to be able to control what you do so that they can funnel you through channels like the App Store, though, you know, my experience with WebOS, though, especially, being able to actually just take it apart and do what I wanted with it, really, like, that's not doable anymore. And with that experience that I got back then, most kids don't get that nowadays. So I'm actually kind of worried for the future of open source development because most of the kids have something like an iPad, a tablet that has programming applications that don't really let them do more. It lets them do tiny little apps inside of a window. But I learned to do things because I was like, oh, I don't like how that is. I don't like that the text size is small. I don't like, though, that I'm stuck to doing multimedia editing this way. I don't like that I have this giant machine that I can't understand. So I want to make a bigger version of it, though. I want to make the text size bigger. I want to make my own emulator. And I was able to just do that because I had computers that let me do that. I didn't have to ask someone to buy me a better computer, though, right? You pay $700 for a tablet, though, and you can't even do programming on it. Well, what is this? And I just kind of feel bad for a lot of the kids that are growing up nowadays. And sure, there are plenty of them that will get into open source and all, but in a lot of times they don't have the same opportunities that I did. I had parents who were remarkably technology friendly, compared to a lot of people, though, that don't really understand the innards of how everything works. Most people have phones that don't exactly let them do things. And so I think it's really important to make platforms, though, that actually that a lot of people use, that have really, really good UX, though, to draw people in. They have the opportunity to let kids, explore how to actually build things. And you can't do that inside of a tiny little box like Scratch, though. Scratch is incredibly nice for teaching people how to make applications, but it's just too small. You can't expand out of there easily. And, sorry, I went on a bit of a rant, but it's a bit frustrating for me. Then we have, what's it called? Flatland and Poltergeist. Oh, 1 second. What is 524? We have Comet. So, what was it I was talking about? Oh, wait, actually, someone sent in another example of Stardust. Yes. No, it's okay. It's not. It doesn't need a mic. Right. This is another example of community collaboration. I collaborated with Matthew Krogan over there, I think, in the back, to get Stardust XR working on these pair of glasses right here, right? So the demo is failing, of course it is, but here's a pre-made video of being able to interact with all of your 3D applications, though. And honestly, the only way I even met Matthew was through Scale, though, and The only way I kept going to scale was because I had those opportunities to speak at scale, right? So, without the ability to do that, this would have never happened. So I'm really grateful to Matthew and to Scale and to everyone. Is my talk an hour long? Okay. Yep, that's what I thought. Oh, so I can stay as long as I want. Yippee! We can spend all day waiting for this demo to work. Maybe the demo will work today after all. Yeah, NVIDIA is breaking. Oh, here's a fun one, though. Here's a fun one. So, being in open source allows you to design for things that are not really seen necessarily as that important. Like, this is a button that doesn't pretend to be pushed while you're pressing it, though. The only reason I was able to think about this is because I'd seen so many sorts of weird interfaces from open source. I mean, you have stuff like Nemo UX, though, where you literally have windows flying all over a giant table, right? Like here's an example, though. Actually, I can show you this video. I can show you some of my open source inspiration for what I've been doing here. What did you say? If it'll load. We'll wait for that to load. I guess it doesn't want to load. Shoot. It's not going my way. So here's another thing, though. I went to another thing called MIT Reality Hack back in 2020, which is basically a giant hackathon for augmented and virtual reality. And with a team, I created this, which is called the Spatial Universal Interaction System. It solves a very key problem in AR and VR, which is how do you deal with a bunch of objects, though, that have been created by a bunch of people and also all want to be interacted with at the same time, right, with any input, which is a ridiculously hard problem to solve, though. What's it called? Because everything was open source, though, I've taken this code and I've basically ported it, not just to Stardust, but I ported it to StereoKid, and I'm also been trying to update the Unity source code, which means, though, that this hopefully will eventually be seen in a lot of different projects, or be inspiration for somebody to make something even better. Actually, how about we go for questions? I know I've said a lot of things, though, and so I figure, anyone have any questions?
So Stardust is written in Rust, right? But did it have a history before you wrote it in Rust?
Oh, I forgot to talk about that. Yes. So Stardust was originally written in C++, which it had, what's it called? So it's because Stardust was written in C++, because at the time, though, I thought, because of my previous experiences, though, Rust is too complicated. Why would I need it? Basically, what's it called? So I wrote it, though, and then I spent 2 months straight debugging error after error after error, and because the number of errors wasn't going down, though, it was actually somewhat going up, I had to take some of my own advice. And this is difficult, though, but this is where wow, the whole page froze. This is where the advice that I gave myself during the lightning talk came in, right here, right? I had to rewrite it entirely in Rust, or something else, though. And I chose Rust after a really long time figuring out what would work. But when you're fighting a losing battle, though, when the tool that you're using is just making life even harder for you, you know, sometimes you have to just cut your losses and rewrite it in something better. And that's a really huge time loss. So you have to take special care, but it's worth it.
How long did it take you to write it in Rust?
It took 6 months.
That's
So
not
I
bad.
know you're thinking, though, why, if it only took 2 months of hardship, why did you rewrite it and it took 6 months? And the specific reason why is because it had a lot of other benefits. And actually, that was one of the best decisions I ever made in terms of the Stardust project, because now people are able to contribute. It's much easier to package it, though. It's much easier for everybody to use it. It's much more stable. It's much more lightweight. Everything, though. And another bonus, I got the whole Rust community behind it. So just changing the programming language actually got a whole new set of people to be interested in this project, right? So yeah, thank you.
And it seems like you're able to develop it at a faster rate than Apple and Microsoft and all the other people who are interested in VR.
So what they have is polished, though. Big companies generally tend to focus heavily on one specific use case, though, something that they think is what people want and will get them money. But with open source, you have to build a community and you have to be engaged with people. So you have to more develop what they want, assuming you want to get any large amount of contributors and such. So that forced me to create something that is more useful. It's still in early stages, of course, but right now we have something for mind palaces, for example. Like I showed before, Comet, though, being able to create a mind palace is one of the best use cases, in my opinion, for augmented and virtual reality. And that's incredibly difficult to do on anything else. So that's why I focused a lot of my energy there. And already, though, you have people like Matthew actually using Stardust for monitor replacement, though, because it's more lightweight. And you have people like, for example, Safira Kai, who are working on getting it for mind palaces and for reminders and so on. And that would have only happened because I had to engage with the community, because I had to talk with a ton of people that all wanted a ton of different things, and so it required making it useful for all of them. So yeah. Thanks so much for the questions. Any more? Oh.
So we've talked a lot over the past few days about Stardust and getting it places, but what's your next big feature? What's the next big thing you want to tackle with Stardust?
Yeah, so Stardust, of course, needs a lot of contributors, though. And in order to get contributors, you have to have something that is an actual functional and useful thing that developers are interested in. To get anywhere, to get people to use your tool, you have to make it user-friendly. To get developers to use your tool, you have to make it user-friendly and developer-friendly. So one of the biggest things is installation, right? Because there have been a bunch of developers, though, who are super Rust experts, though, they've been able to mostly just install this through the harder channels, right? By installing 500 packages and then, building it. But one of the key things is, how do we get this to where anybody can just download it, install it, try it out, provide feedback, though, so that they can say, oh, this doesn't really work for me, and then we can know exactly what to build. A lot of the contributors here that are on Stardust, though, are developers that are so focused on code that they just don't really have time for project management, right? And that means that we need a clear direction to focus. And so having that feedback, though, from more installs helps. And so to that end, we've got Nix packages, thanks to the help of Matthew and several other people. We have Fedora packages, thanks to the Ultramarine people at Fira Labs. And we've got AUR packages that are currently in the process of being built, and so on. And, that's because the Stardust community has intersected with these other communities, though. The Stardust community has intersected with the Nix community and with the Ultramarine community and the Arch community and so on. So, yeah, good question. Any other questions?
So let's say you really want to work full-time on a project like this? What does it take?
That's something I have yet to actually figure out because while I do work full-time on this, though, a lot of the time, that's only because I've been doing jobs, though, in order to pay the bills, saving up money, and then basically coasting on it while I work on things, right? So, for example, I worked at Holos for 2 years, right? And Holos was very useful. Holos, for the record, is basically education and training for augmented and virtual reality. The images don't want to load because of this internet, but it's what's it called? Oh, well, they don't have any screenshots. Well, basically, though, the idea is that you know, you can use your hands and such in order to create lesson plans and such. And the basic, so I worked here for 2 years, though, and that's actually where I learned a lot more of the specifics of XR interaction design, right? For example, a lot of the interfaces in Stardust are heavily inspired from Holos, though. I learned about signifiers and affordances. I learned about a ton of things that were important. And I also gained a lot of money, though, that I could use, so where when I quit that job, though, to focus on Stardust for a lot longer, I had literally 1.5 years worth of money, right, where I could live full-time on that. What I'm trying to do now, though, is I'm trying to be able to get that funding while I'm still working on Stardust. When you have to work on a second job, it takes a lot of time away. And thanks to Scale, I found a lot of different people, though, that I can talk to and build relationships with in the future so that I can hopefully get paid to do the things that I love and that help them, too. So, yeah, thank you for the question. Is it working? Nope. Yep, that's NVIDIA for you. Demo's broken again. It's 5:38 though, so we got about 15 more minutes. Oh, dang. But yeah. Does anyone have any more questions, or should I explain more of what I've been doing? Mm-hmm.
I'm just curious, since you're sort of the leader of this community and there's a lot of people sort of depending on it, how do you deal with burnout?
Yeah. So burnout is generally, from what I understand, burnout is the result of putting a lot of effort into something and seeing no emotional return, or very low emotional return. And that's happened to me a lot throughout this project, though. I mean, something as big as this, though, where there's so much work to be done that you can't easily show to people who aren't interested, developers who know all of this already. The only way I've been able to deal with it, though, is to build a series of people who are supportive, though, and some of them understand the inner workings, so they can help and say, oh, wow, that's really cool, and they can help out on that. But then I also have the Cool Demos channel, for example, where I get to show off all of the stuff, and you know, I can get compliments and such, though. And also, I've been learning to pace myself a bit more, because that's one of the most difficult things in a lot of this stuff is you're so interested and you're so invested in this particular project, though, and everything, that you want to work on it as much as physically possible, but it's not possible. So you have to pace yourself, though, so that you don't burn out. And that's easier said than done, of course, but it's very important.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Do you think that if you did get a job doing VR, that might actually contribute to burnout? Because then you would be working on it full time, and then you would also be working on the open source project, and it would just, you'd begin to hate what you love. The question was, if you did get a full-time job and got paid well to do this, do you think it would contribute to the burnout? Because actually, you don't want to spend all 100% of your time on this, right? Because
Yeah.
so sometimes when you work on the same thing that you love, it can lead to burnout. What do you think about that?
Well, burnout, though, it can happen from doing multiple things. Sometimes, though, when you use up a lot of mental energy on a particular full-time job, though, and then you go home and you work on something, though, you can still get burnout from that, though, right? Burnout isn't necessarily, this is the amount of time total I am working on this, though. It could just be, I don't have enough breaks, though, and so therefore I keep putting myself into a state of stress whenever I'm working on this thing, though. So, financial stress is only one kind of stress, though. There's emotional and a lot of other ones. So it may work for some people. I've tried it with a part-time job, and while I can do it, it's not ideal. So I've been exploring other avenues with, of course, a regular job as a backup. Yeah. Actually, the talk is almost over because we got 4 minutes left, so. And time for one last question? Okay. Well, thank you.
Nova.
Oh, you have a question? Or, no, okay. Yeah. Thank you, everybody.